this email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
I'm joined today by Brian Zimmerman, the CEO of Cleveland Metroparks, tasked with overseeing and managing thousands of acres of parkland, golf courses, lakefronts, hiking trails, a zoo, and much, much more. In 2021, with Brian at the helm, Cleveland Metroparks was awarded the National Gold Medal Best in Nation Award for Excellence in Parks and Recreation Management, which is a huge accomplishment in any year, but especially so in the middle of a pandemic. We'll get into that and so much more, but first, Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me today, and it's a true pleasure to talk about what's going on in Cleveland, Ohio.
Excellent. You got a lot under your belt there. That's a lot of land to cover.
It's a great geography, and one of the interesting things coming out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I kind of thought Ohio was relatively flat, but the glacier actually did make it all the way down here. We've got parts of the park that were glaciated, and what I mean by that is that it's carved out, and we've got the Cuyahoga River Valley, one of the most historic rivers in the country, where the Clean Water Act came out of because of how bad we were polluting it. But we've also got the Chagrin River and the Rocky River, two main tributaries to the Great Lakes.
Yeah, so I'm dating myself now, but when I was right out of high school, I joined the Navy and was stationed for a little while at Great Lakes in Chicago, outside of Chicago. And we'd have to sneak across the border into Wisconsin. At 18, you could still drink there. Not that I would ever recommend that, but back then you could. So a little bit of time in Wisconsin.
I understand the border crossings.
So tell us a little about your journey to leadership. It looks like you spent most of your career kind of in the public sector, golf courses, and now with what you're doing as well, which is a very unique path. And I'm just curious, for those out there who aspire to follow your path, walk us kind of through how you got to where you are today.
Clint, I'm going to actually start back kind of in my college days. And I think there was a lot of formation that happened. I went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison and had an opportunity to, I really loved being outdoors. I grew up on a big farm, and I spent time working for Nakoma Country Club in Madison, Wisconsin, right near the Arboretum. And over time, I kind of evolved into bartending, running a heavy security company. And I mean, we did concerts like Rush, Pink Floyd, U2, we did Pantera, Offspring, Brooks and Dunn, and the list just keeps going on. But what my point on that is there was a lot of customer service, there was a lot of guest interactions, and there was a product that we were able to put out. And then having this small little kind of lawn cutting business, I cut 3 or 4 yards per week, and that was direct interaction, so that was kind of entrepreneurial. And when you look at the role, fast forward to my late 30s when I came to Cleveland, we have 48 business units that we've created across this 24,000 acres that include 8 golf courses, a world-class zoo, parking lots, restaurants, marinas, yacht clubs. It's this full gamut of things. And the journey, the best advice that I can give anyone is don't say no to an opportunity. And that happened for me in Milwaukee. I was overseeing 16 municipal golf courses, and I was challenged to step up into a role to help kind of run the budget through for 156 parks on the park side of the system, and then had the opportunity not too long after to step up into a role of the chief of operations, and at age 33. So I was in charge of a good part of a $25 million budget, overall $50 million budget, and really just flourished in the opportunity to recruit people, train people, and then really help move the ball forward. So I didn't say no to an opportunity, and I studied very hard, to be very frank. I mean, I learned all of the union rules when the unions were more prevalent, and just spent a lot of time really understanding the system that I was running.
Now, this is a personal aside, and it may, it kind of sticks in my craw because one of my best friends is Joe Hamilton, who was the runner-up to Ron Dane for the Heisman Trophy from, I believe he played for Wisconsin. And I still to this day say my man Joe got jobbed, and Ron got the Career Achievement Award instead of the Heisman for 1 year award. But that's a separate story. So,
Clint, you know what they say in Wisconsin? They say, Ron Dane. That is what they say, and 80,000 people sing it back to him. And so, I mean, college football is one of my favorite all-time things, and Ron Dane was one of those very unique athletes that ran behind a tremendous line. He picked great cuts, and he was hard to bring down.
Yeah, I was at Joe's when he got inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame up in New York. I was lucky enough to go with him. And, one of the things I love about him, he's so humble. He was thanking, just like you said, he was thanking his offensive line and his receivers because he said, I can't do any of that without him, right? So, and this podcast is focused on teams and collaboration. So it's a perfect kind of story, right? And everybody loves sports. So
the analogies are true across all disciplines. I mean, one of our core values here at the Metroparks is teamwork. And, if we don't work together, the success of us lies within others. And if other departments don't, work forward and, if the offensive line, has a bad day, then the running back's going to have a bad day. And, it's just, I think there's a lot of components to understanding the psychology. And here's the other thing that I think is very unique. And I'm going to be fascinated to find out what happens in 2-3 years from now with these at-home work models and these hybrid models and models of agencies that didn't necessarily have the hybrid or the work-from-home model, how a culture will stay or how a culture may fragment. And we always talk about culture beating strategy. And I firmly believe that when you have a strong culture, you can attack any part of your strategy and be successful. But if that starts to fracture, their strategy then can not necessarily be as evolved or be as complete.
Let's dig into that a little bit because that's near and dear to my heart as well as this idea behind culture. And I'm curious your thoughts on this because in my day job, it's a lot of face-to-face work. We plan big global projects and we bring everybody together for 3 or 4 days to plan the project, and we get to know each other. We get to learn about each other, right? So we form some connections. And when I think of culture in a company or an organization, I think of what you learn when the lights are off, right? So how does somebody react when the camera's off? But you see it. You're in the office with them, right? In a face-to-face environment where you're all local, you see how once that person hangs up, how do they react? Do they say something under their breath? Or you see all of that happen, and I worry or I wonder if you're in a remote world where you can only see somebody when the lights are on, how do you really learn about culture? What do you think about that?
It's 100% correct. And, there's a lot of our communication is nonverbal, right? Do we look down? Do we look away? Are we disinterested? Is there something other going on? And, there's so many components to what I call an active workplace that really has engaged employees that are following the mission and really driving things forward. The part that I think that 2021 taught us was this miss of the hallway conversations. And they talk about water cooler, but there's a level of engagement and camaraderie that comes with defining your culture of your agency and following your mission. When you said, leave meeting, boom, you're back to your 4 walls and your roof of your house. I don't know how that's sustainable from a long term. And, do people become more a number, a 1, 2, 3, 4, in the system? Balancing this 24,000 acre system that's really 365 days a year is really a unique dynamic. And to win the national gold medal for best, managed park district in the country in 2021, that's not lost on this team that had to dig deep and really pull things forward. Our zookeepers, they need to be here, all the time. Our park operations, we had record visitation. I mean, we were over 20 million recreation visits across the park district. And, there were actually times when we actually had to go counterintuitive. We actually had to close parks to keep them open, if that makes any sense. Meaning we actually put barricades up in parts of our parks to actually decrease the amount of cars that were parking there, to thus then somewhat limit the amount of people that were going through because they were so full. When the pandemic was in that full swing in that May, June, July, there wasn't a lot of opportunities for people to go places but the parks. Our golf courses stayed open. The achievements that our team was able to accomplish, under some really stressful times. And you talked about the lights being off. My whole operations office team, they were out either washing golf cars, they were helping serve programs. Our outdoor eds was, hauling kayaks out of the water. Our marketing team was setting up this 6 feet. We have this buzzard thing here. I probably did 200 different, media engagements, trying to explain to people how to keep the parks open. We closed roads off for biking. I mean, honestly, Clint, it was awesome because we got to use a totally different part of, our brain to think so creatively. And there's some things, really good things that came out of it. It wasn't all negative.
Yeah, I worry that I'm a big face-to-face person, collaboration person, and I certainly love the video tools and the other tools we have at our disposal. But I do think, and I know there are some people that are the opposite of me, that they believe 100% remote is the way to go and never see each other face to face. For me, there's this hallway conversation that happens where you really get to know somebody through just junk conversations that happen about, hey, what'd you do this weekend? What are you going to do this weekend? Hey, how would the game go? Are you playing golf? You just all these generic, superfluous conversations that really establish who we are as individuals, and I get to know you on a different level. I just don't think those are happening on virtual calls. I mean, I could be wrong, but to me, I don't make the same level of connection. It even goes deeper than that. There's some studies done about how eye contact matters, right? And right now it looks like I'm looking at you, but I'm actually looking at my camera. So I can barely see you out the corner of my eye over here on the screen. But to look, if I want to look into your eyes, I have to look down, and now I'm looking at the camera. So it's all those slight nuances are disappearing. And then as we've gotten further into the pandemic, most people turn their camera off. So now you've lost all the visual cues that you might have. And if they're muted, then you really lost everything. So anyway, we'll see where this goes. I think it's a pendulum, and we swing the fully one direction, which is all remote. And I know some people are probably never going to come back, but let's be honest and look at your world. There's some jobs you can't do remotely, and you have to. If I'm an Amazon driver, delivery driver, I have to be on site. I can't be remote. So there's some things that are never going to come back, or that never going to come back to in the office. But I think there's some that can never be remote. So.
And there's certainly ways to balance that, right, Clint? There's certainly ways to hybridize some of the workforce, but it's not all jobs are created equal, but you try to find equity in what you do. And I think that's been this very balanced organizational approach to, not only project planning. We had one of our busiest years in capital construction between 20 and 21. I mean, taking on completing the Wendy Park Bridge, which was this huge connection, opening up our waterfront. We won a national award for social equity innovation. On top of that, we won the national gold medal. I mean, it was one of those really kind of like remarkable things, but there were so many different human interactions that literally had to happen. And, you can't build a bridge from, the confines of your house. And so the ability, when people talk about, sustainable workforces and bosses and things, they leave because of maybe not being recognized or being connected. And I just don't know how that happens through a screen anymore. So it's going to be fascinating, I think, the next few years to see companies' cultures that survive and other ones that maybe don't.
Yeah, you mentioned the value your team really helps you to get some of these awards. And this is not the first one y'all have gotten. And looking back, you've had many, many awards over the years. But what are some of the accomplishments you think that your team did to help you achieve this particular award?
There's a number of different ways that we've kind of looked at the structure of the team, and we've been very blessed with this leadership team that believes in the ecosystem and the mission. And we talk about connecting communities and influencing conservation of our world. And this world, we just got the report on global warming and how many vehicles and all these trails that we're putting into place matter. And when you find team members that believe in that mission and they can get behind it, it's truly a remarkable thing. And when you see the momentum that happens and the fact that, yes, I mean, we've won 5 national gold medals and you can only win them once every 5 years. So we've had a quarter of a century of or more of solid, balanced, exceptional leadership, and that shouldn't be lost on our team here. And so we looked at our strategic planning process. Here's a very other unique thing about park districts in Ohio that we're levy funded, and so we work very hard for the citizens of Cuyahoga County and Hinckley Township, in particular our taxing authority. But we remain debt free, so we own 24,000 acres. 8 golf courses, the zoo, and we still remain debt free. And so when you have a pandemic that happens, we really had to pivot a lot of different things, and our employees really got super creative. One was this drive-through zoo concept where we basically were closed down because we were lumped into the entertainment district of like the Cedar Points and others. And we basically showed, no, we're like a park and we can actually do this drive-through concept, and we got it approved and we were able to open. And it was just this magnificent thing that happened. And so we got very creative to basically make it through those couple of really tough years.
Just as an aside, did any of the animals get sick? Because I'd heard there had been some transmission at some zoos between, I guess, humans and the chimpanzees and the apes, et cetera.
There are certainly, I mean, when you look at the gorilla, species in general, we had our first baby gorilla in our 139-year history, and our team, it was a preemie, and our animal care team and our vet team did an amazing job, but we did do some vaccinations. We've been very mindful of the distances of animals. We actually are doing with the Ohio State University deer that have COVID. I mean, it's really a remarkable amount of work that we've done with it. But when we were able to keep people in the cars, there was this level of distancing. The fact that our zoo sits on 188 acres and it's open really allowed for people to have an outdoor activity when restaurants were closed, when fine dining and movie theaters and all that was closed. The parks were that respite, and we talked about it on a national scale of the position of parks. If green space wasn't as accessible as it is, in other parts of the country, we're really blessed here with this very interconnected system.
Do you think that since you were able to open in that fashion, do you think that's why the number of attendees went up, because you were kind of not the only game in town, but one of the few? We kind of were the only game in town. I mean, when you looked at what had to close and what opportunities we had to try to get open, we actually extended our tee times at our golf courses. We were normally running 8-minute tee times. We went to 10s. And now we've stayed at 10s because from a customer service perspective, it allows for a better cushion between golfers that may not have been able to necessarily hold the pace. And so we've had less complaints about pace of play. And that's been a very positive part of it. So we were trying to distance to make sure that people weren't bundling up at the tee boxes. And so that's actually worked really well. The zoo, I will tell you, I walked the zoo, about a month into it. One of the eeriest things, the giraffes followed me all the way around their entire exhibit, just watch, because they hadn't seen really people for a period of time. And so, I think there's this equal balance of humans we want to be connected to things. And again, that goes back to this, this bifurcated work system. But I enjoy seeing people. I enjoy this opportunity to be connected to nature. Well, if I was going to play golf on your course, you'd have to make it 30-minute segments, because the way I play, one of my really good friends was on the Georgia Tech golf team with Stuart Sink and David Duvall. And when I play with him, I would just hit my ball till everybody else put it out, and then I pick my ball up and go back to the cart and on to the next hole. So you'd have to make a lot bigger gap if I was playing.
If you were playing with those two guys, you might just want to hit from wherever they land.
Yeah, that's probably what I should have done. I was pretty good at putting thanks to putt. So the rest of the game was definitely not in my strong suit. So
they say drive for show and putt for dough. So you probably had that part down really well.
That's true. I'll have to think about that one. So let's talk about communication skills and how they translate to leadership. You've led and currently lead a number of teams across sectors. What would you say is your leadership communication style?
I'm thinking of how we try to communicate during this pandemic. And, one of the things that we heard in a real loud and clear that we communicated extremely well with our staff, and whether it was an email, whether it was a video, which I was probably doing bi-weekly videos. So it was as real time as we could possibly get. And we had so many statements that came back from employees and spouses that we knew more about what was going on through the communication of the Metroparks than, my employer or what was going on. And we had a governor that was very active, Amy Acton, the head of the health department. And things did change, and we had to basically communicate and pivot as the rules of engagement changed relative to COVID. And so I try to, listen first as best I possibly can. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. So you try to use in that order. So you try to listen as much as you can. You try to process. And, for me, I'm a type A, and I like to get stuff done. And I probably look like the hungry hippo trying to, take all the marbles off the board. And, we're trying to win at things. But when you can listen for a period of time and sleep on it just a little bit, and then bring your team into it to the degree that they can help massage or come at it from the diversity side, or, equity or access, or any of the things that we may be looking at, different lenses really help how we communicate well to others. And those are some of the, I think, unique things that we really learned through this. And like I said, there was something to be said for missing of the handshakes and missing of, some of those things kind of along the way.
Yeah, I opened the podcast with a quote from George Bernard Shaw it basically says that the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place. And I think that's one of the pitfalls of some forms of communication, is that you think you've communicated, but did they really hear it in the way you intended? And I really like what you did. It sounds like you had used more video than you had in the past. And I think that's also helpful, that because then they can see the facial expression, or sometimes they can listen to it again. Because we all know that sometimes we hear a message, and because we're having a bad day, we hear it in a different way than if we were hearing that message on a day that we were having a good day. And so I think having the videos or the recordings is helpful to go back and listen to it, because maybe you hear it differently on the next day. So
And I think there was something to be said, and you hit it on the head. There was a few staff that actually called and said, "Are you doing okay?" I mean, leading through it candidly. I mean, they've seen the good, and they've seen some of the challenge, and we've had certainly some of those pressure points. And I probably looked rough. I mean, there were some days that we were looking at laying off 250 part-time employees, and we had to furlough employees, and we had to go through a lot of those things. But we communicated as effectively as we possibly could, knowing full well that was going to affect some of the people's lifestyles along the way. But we didn't hide those things, and the delivery of the message was clear, and it was from me. It wasn't from I didn't delegate it off. When you get some of the awards and you receive those accolades, you can't be afraid of the tough times. And honestly, that's one of my strengths. I love digging in and using a different part of it, and using the team's time and talents to think. Look, at that point in time, there was no box. There wasn't anybody thinking in or out of it or on it or whatever. We were just like, hey, this is what's in front of us, and where do we need to get to? I can remember, Clint, we did scenarios, right? Scenarios from, okay, this thing is going to last a month. Okay, what happens in a month? What happens in 2? What happens in 3? What happens in 4? Well, we ended up all the way to 5, and we were well on our way to 6 as the ship balanced, right? But then, COVID still continued for another probably 8-9 months after that. But at that point in time, we had hit our stride again of where we needed to be. And from a revenue standpoint, because of our $150 million budget, 30% of it's coming from earned revenue. And so that outward facing part, we really needed to make sure that we hit well. But from that leadership style, we were present. And I think that was one of the things that shouldn't be missed, that we were present during the good, and we were uber present during the tough times.
And I think people appreciate that. I think they appreciate the honesty, and I'm like you. I'm a big fan of if we get something good, it's the team's credit, and if we get something bad, then it's my fault, right? I mean, it's just I could have done a better job of managing it or doing something different. So I'm sure your team appreciates the level of transparency you offered. That personal touch as well of sharing the bad news is helpful.
And people were going through things, right? I mean, we couldn't see some of them, but the part that we haven't talked about is the mental health, and where did that end up? We were really mindful of employees that were maybe single, that were living alone and not necessarily connected, and making sure that they had an outlet, or we created small little groups for teams to talk through things. And now that we've kind of reintegrated back to the workplace here, at least in park administration, we have this thing called Harvest Owl, and twice a week, 3 times a week, we have food brought in that's that you can purchase or order kind of online. And the level of camaraderie that we're seeing kind of return, it's been nice to see the tenor, tone, and pace of the break room. And then you hear the activity. Hey, I'm working on this. Did you think about that? I got a donor over here. And there's that kind of high five, and the energy is back. And so that, to me, truthfully, it matters. I mean, it really matters.
And again, I think that's a perfect example of how you're not going to get that serendipitous conversation happening virtually. I mean, some of that has to be shoulder to shoulder, face to face, whether it's through plexiglass or whatever. But that coming together, that camaraderie, I think is so important. And for a lot of the work we do, especially project work, which is some of the next questions I have for you, because you did mention capital projects and all the different things you're doing. So in a recent interview with Cleveland Magazine, you shared a bit about what's next for Cleveland Metroparks. A couple of the big projects included adding phase 1 of your pump track system, and I'm going to ask you exactly what that is because I don't know that, and also rebuilding a gorilla and orangutan habitat in the rainforest. And I know from experience how much planning and preparation is required for high-stakes projects like those. Can you share a bit about your organization's approach to planning and managing these diverse projects?
Yeah, that's it's a really great question, being kind of the funding mechanisms that we have. But then I would use the words leverage, and I would also use OPM, other people's money, and that from the big picture, that is folks that are willing to step up. And we had a lot of success with philanthropy during the times of COVID. People that says look, I want to give to where it was given to me. And that's not lost on us. And so we've been able to leverage some of these big projects. The pump track that you mentioned, Clint, is this at our Ohio and Erie Canal, which is this long that opened kind of the west, down the Ohio or down the Cuyahoga River, that opened up the goods and services being moved through the mid part of Ohio. Having said that, it's this kind of bike hub, and we do a park run there every weekend where people can kind of time it and improve their health. But this pump track, it's basically where you get your bike flowing and you get moving, and it creates some inertia. And so that was phase one. We've got phase two, a competition track. We've got a kids skills course. We're really trying to find more ways that people can integrate. Plus, all these people that bought these bikes need a place to go during the pandemic. And so we thought, what a better place. We had a parcel of land at Ohio and Erie Canal. We also are working on this one, really unique project that to highlight Garfield Park Reservation in the city of Garfield Heights. Way back, it's a legacy park. It's over a century old. We're actually bringing back a 2.5 acre pond. We're bringing clean water through the Wolf Creek, which is a really big deal. So we're a natural resources agency. We're conservation. We're trying to improve the water quality that goes into Lake Erie. And so our Wolf Creek feeds into Mill Creek, which is the tallest waterfall, which is absolutely gorgeous. There's a 40-foot waterfall right in the middle, the heart of this county, that then feeds into the Ohio and Erie Canal. So that's another really big project that we're restoring the ecosystem. And then you mentioned this world-class zoo. We had this wonderful gorilla baby here. The team did an amazing job. It was a preemie, and he is absolutely growing up into this beautiful, beautiful baby gorilla. But we've realized that, that in the zoos, in the modern zoo going forward, is really more about the exhibit and habitat space and less about more in the collection. And so the modern zoo is really looking at in the Daniel Maltz Rhino Reserve. We took a small exhibit and expanded it threefold. We did the Roseboro Tiger Passage, where cats, what do they like to do? They like to perch up on top of things. Well, the way they were exhibited is they were kind of back over a moat, and cats like to sleep. And if they were laying down, you couldn't see them. So now all these perches are all above us, and then you can walk underneath them, and then there's glass that you can come right up next to them. So this world classic gorilla exhibit, we're going to redo the front entrance to really have this wonderful arrival point. It's going to have this space where children and adults can interact. I had a chance to go to the Emmons Zoo and crawl with the gibbons. And as I walked across this, it's probably 30 feet up in the air, this gibbon monkey went right with me on the opposite side, and he goes, whoop, 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 whoop. They make these wonderful noises, but the interaction and the activity that was happening, it was electric. And when you start to see that, you get engaged, and maybe it's the next Diane Fossey or the next Aldo Leopold gets inspired out of being in these natural habitats. So this world-class gorilla exhibit that we're working on, the front entrance, we're going to work on an orang. And this is this EFT. So if anybody had watched the Super Bowl at SoFi, the football stadium, that covering is exactly what we'll go over this new gorilla exhibit, which will allow 90% of the natural light to go through. Therefore, we can actually grow trees and really create this wonderful natural habitat here in Cleveland.
Wow, very, very nice. Can you give us an example of a challenge or problem that you and your team had to solve during this, some of the past projects? And what were your problem-solving strategies as a team, and what did you learn as a business leader?
I think there's a number of ways to answer that, and there's a number of, I think, challenges. We never look at it as hey, this is a problem. There's an opportunity for either improved communication or process. And we built a bridge called the Wendy Park Bridge over what is arguably one of the busiest rail lines in the country, over the Norfolk Southern Railroad. We had the rights to be there, but railroads do not make your life easy to go over things or go under things. And we needed to acquire land. The land where this bridge was sitting was what they called paper deed streets. So we had to clean up a lot of that. We had to buy some private property. We had to allocate some public property. We had to get Norfolk and Southern. They had to have, engineers. We had to have process inspections. We had to have bolt tightenings. And so it started when my son was running track as a freshman. So that would have been spring of his freshman year. and it opened 4 years later, almost the 2 weeks after he graduated high school. So it was a long process, and so you have to play the long game in some of those areas where challenges are going to arise. And we talked about this world-class zoo. When you build an animal exhibit, there's containment for safety on both sides of it, and so there are so many people that need to get involved. And when you're doing a big, multifaceted project, the more people, the more voices you can get at the beginning to get it going is super important. But then once you get that trajectory moving, I call it, you put the hammer on the nail, and you got to keep pounding that thing down to get to the end game, because otherwise these projects can go on forever. And so, I love those challenging ones. And, we had one where we got permission to do a pick on the bridge, and someone didn't show up, and they called and said, "Where are you?" And the guy's like, "Well, I'm in Pittsburgh." And he goes, "Well, we're in Cleveland. We need to, he goes, "Well, go ahead." And, we got called into the office, and they were going to shut us down, and they were going to do all this stuff. And I just said, I must have misunderstood. And so I sincerely apologize. And so, there's a way to, I think, redirect sometimes when meetings may not be going quite the right direction. And so you understand where you need to get to, how you need to get there. And I think leadership, there's a level of emotional intelligence. If you don't have a high EI, leadership, it may be a little bit tougher for you, but being able to read a room and understand where you need to get to and who you need to diffuse or who you need to, fan a flame underneath a little bit to put a little pressure on, all those are skills that leaders need to have depending on which button they need to push.
I think you may have just answered this next question, but I'll ask it anyway in case you want to add to it. So what advice do you have to share with fellow executives, directors, team leaders, et cetera, who are responsible for managing the execution of complex projects?
The one thing we've learned here, and we didn't do well kind of in my first few years here, is that there has to be somebody that wakes up to think about a big complex project every single day. So, when I get up and I'm eating my shredded wheats in the morning, I'm thinking about the components of what's going on. And, we're talking about some of these projects that are, the Tiger project, which transportation investment generating economic recovery, was really about rebuilding the infrastructure, our transportation trail system that has now spurred this. But if somebody didn't wake up every day thinking about it, that's when projects can get lost or get wind underneath and start heading the wrong direction. Certainly it's on my radar, but we're balancing 700 full-time employees, 24,000 acres, I think 40,000, it's like 4,000 volunteers. There's a lot of activity, but the success lies in the fact that you've got somebody that says, "Hey, I've got the bull by the horns, and I'm running this project." And then you've got somebody to go back to and say, "Hey, what's going well? Are there pain points? Do we need to dislodge anything? Let's keep moving." And that's simplifying a lot of things about funding and all the other things. But the success of a project, once it's hatched and ready to go, you've got to have somebody that's living, breathing, and eating it every day.
For sure. Absolutely. Or like you said, things fall through the cracks. So I like that way you took on and said, "I must have misunderstood." That I thought this, basically you're taking on the fact the guy didn't show up, was in the wrong place. And you're taking ownership because at the end of the day, you're in charge, right?
Yes. It wasn't even my guy, to be quite honest. It wasn't even a person that worked for me, but it was just one of those unique things. I'm like, look, if this is going to be successful, there's where we're going to need to get to. And at the end of the day, we got to where we needed to. And I remember walking out and the owners of the construction firm was like, that was good.
That's always a good pat on the back. So what's the best book or article you've read recently, and what was the key takeaway?
So if you saw my desk, Clint, you'd see how many things that I get to read throughout the course of the day. So, whether it's, we're talking about the levy strategy, or we're talking about, critical communications scheduling, whether it's the strategic plan. Sometimes I immerse myself in other things outside. So, whether it's Sammy the Bull Graviano's story on the Underboss, it was a mafia book. And sometimes it's just nice to have your brain actually disconnect from things. And that's important. There are certainly lots of leadership books, The Why, the Simon Sinek's of the world. And certainly I do listen to and subscribe to. But sometimes your brain if you don't let it let down a little bit, it's hard to refill it with other things. And so there's times to redirect, those other things. And very truthfully, when I like reading, I like, short stories. There's magazines now that are very tailor-made for me. They're one pagers. I'm also that very unique guy. I read from the back to the front. And there's actually a science of how they market for people like me, that I'll open up the magazine and I'll flip to the back and I'll read the back page first, and then I'll work my way forward. I've done that. I have no idea why, but that's what I've always done. I'm not the traditional, front forward. So, but I do like those quick hitters that give me, 3 key points. I probably am not smart enough to remember more than 3 anyway.
I think that you must be pretty smart if you can remember what was on the back page and then go to the next to the back page and add context. I mean, you got to be pretty smart to hold all that information in your head, right? So,
well, it's interesting because one of the things that people ask is like, what makes, I think, me successful? And the people always say you don't forget anything. And I said, if it matters to you, it should matter to me. And so that's my goal to remember those things. And, remembering people's names matter. And, having coached high school wrestling for a lot of years, and, each year a new class of kids come in. So you'll have 40 kids, and, you want to learn their names in the first week so that there's a connection to you as the coach. And there's ownership. It's like, hey, I don't want to disappoint that individual. He knows my name. He knows my family. He knows that I'm doing this. So there's something to be said for that. But it's also when you're managing so many projects and you could write things down and then a paper falls on top of it and everything else. But when these check-ins happen, here's another very interesting thing, Clint. I send almost no emails. To people. I'll send, please follow through, please set up, and see me. Because I really want to see the people, or I'll pick the phone up and I'll have a conversation. I don't want to be on something that's got 17 emails attached to something, and I got to go back and reread 17 threads and find out was that person at 3 o'clock in the morning or was that the 8 o'clock in the morning person? Because I'm not exactly sure. Was I getting yelled at? Was it in caps? I'm like, if you need to have a conversation with me, please come to my office. I have an open door and we'll talk through it.
You're my hero, because that's this is called the conversation, right? And that's one of the things that I'm a big fan of is conversations. And people, man, I think today, this world we live in, people are so focused on, let me send a text, let me send an email, let me put something out there on Slack or Jira, these asynchronous one-way communications. And I think it's because I can wipe my hands and go, I'm done, and go do something else. Whereas conversations are two-way. And I think they're so much more powerful. And that's not to say that we should never send an email or never send a text message, but I've seen situations, people send email back and forth. Finally, just pick up the phone. We could have already solved this 10 minutes ago. We just pick up the phone.
How many times have you heard, well, I send you an email? It's like, well, yeah, but you sent it at 10:30 at night and I was sound asleep and I didn't get it till the next morning and I showed up. It's like, well, you couldn't have called and left me a message, or you couldn't have called me that morning. So, but again, that's the personal touch of things. And, we have a lot of wonderful donors here. And, I personalize, thank yous each month to folks that have been our strong supporters. And that matters. And, here's the other thing that matters. Handwritten notes, that's a lost art, right, in this world. And that little personal touch is, hey, thinking of you, thank you so much. That's, when the post office can deliver it on time, that's a whole nother debate, a whole other topic. I'm not sure what's going on there. Having said that, personal touches do matter. A personal connection does matter.
I think you hit on 2 things that we do a lot as well in our company. And one is we do sign all of our holiday cards personally, and I'll send a little, I'll personalize it. And because if I get a holiday card from somebody and it's just a generic print, I'm like, okay, you didn't even think enough about me to at least write my name on it, right? So, and the other one is I teach classes, and pre-pandemic, they were face-to-face classes. And what I noticed was if I have a class of 40, I can usually learn everybody's first name by lunch on the first day. It's just an innate skill that I have. But it's amazing what that does for the person that you know them by name. For whatever reason, it just instantly makes a connection. And I think it's that personal touch you were talking about. It just makes the class go so much better because they think, oh, well, he's listening to me. He knows my name. And it just really resonates with them.
Well, and if I don't show up the next day, he's going to ask. It's like, hey, Bill, where were you yesterday? It's like, I didn't even know you know my name. It's just like, well, that matters. And, Clint, in this world, there's a level of, we're worried about, the accountability. And, in this is on where it's like, well, I sent you an email. Well, it doesn't make you less accountable just because you sent a generic email. It's like you still had to show up. And so when you have that personal connection with folks, it allows for a very unique, opportunity to build off of something. And when you see that, when you're teaching people and instructing, they can see your passion, tenor, tone, and pace, by which you show up every day to teach them something. And that's no different in leadership. When you look at what's happening in the Ukraine, and, we won't necessarily delve into politics, but, that leader's there and he's visible and he's being seen, and there's something to be said for that. And, it's not just when times are good. And again, we talked about that, you're there and you're present.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. So, Brian, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast today. Thanks so much for the conversation.
Absolutely. Can we do this again? This was probably one of the most fun times, and, so conversational, but so important. I think, when people get a chance to listen to this, you have to think about your authentic self and what makes you tick, and, where is your leadership style and how do you want to evolve? And then candidly, like you said, who can help you? Who can kind of help you along your journey? Are there mentors for you? So I appreciate the time. It's been a wonderful, wonderful podcast.
No, thank you very much, Brian.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to clintonmpaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.